Good afternoon and welcome to the Gulf Host exploration of what's happening in the future of hospitality. My name is Mark Napier. I'm the Director of Exhibitions here at Dubai World Trade Center. I'm actually quite excited by this session because as a consumer myself, I've been really enjoying the fact that Dubai has started to open up. We are starting to welcome, as of the 7th of July, international travelers and business tourists to our fine city. Our restaurants and hotels and hospitality centers are also starting to open up. And here at the Trade Center, we had our first exhibition taking place, but in 48 hours. But as a consumer, I'm sort of getting used to what is my new normal, the new face mask and how we socially distance, or physically distance would probably be a better phrase. We're about to be joined by Davina, who's going to introduce our panelists for today. And we're going to be talking about what the future of hospitality is, what challenges the market has had to address, how they're tackling this, and what can I look forward to, what can you look forward to in what is going to be our new normal. Davina, over to you.
Thank you very much. I think everyone should be able to see me and hear me now. So thank you, Mark, for introducing the topic. Before we get started, I'm going to introduce our panel of experts today. We have a lot of insights that are going to be coming through in the next hour. And I just wanted to let the audience know that we do encourage interaction from you as well. Please do ask questions, and we're also going to have polls that will pop up on your screen throughout the webinar. And we're hoping to get feedback from you on industry sentiment, consumer sentiment on a number of topics. So I'm going to introduce my panelists, and if you can please switch on your video when I do so that we can all see you. So we have today His Highness Prince Al Walid bin Nasser, who is the president of the Saudi Arabia Restaurant Association, Peter Schatzberg, who is the CEO and founder of Sweetheart Kitchen, Ekta Bhojwani, who is the VP of Consumer and Partnerships at Kitopi, Duncan Fraser-Smith, who is the founder and managing partner of the Cutting Edge Agency, and Steve Pyle, who is the CEO of Chef Middle East. So now that I've introduced them, I'm going to give them a chance to, first of all, tell me a little bit about your business, what it is you do, and the impact that you've seen from COVID in the last couple of months on your business. Let's keep it brief before we move on to the meatier subjects at hand. And while that happens, we're also going to open up the first poll question for our audience. So Ekta, if you could begin, please. I'm going to shout out the order of speakers so we don't get confused.
Thanks, Davina. Hello, everyone. Nice to be here. My name is Ekta. I work for Kitopi. We are a cloud kitchen operator based in Dubai, but operating across the GCC. As with every business in this industry, we've seen that initial dip that happened when COVID first started. We saw consumers being a little more hesitant from ordering online, getting delivery. We're focused on delivery, so we saw a bit of that. We did a fair bit of research and just saw people had changed both their habits as well as were a bit concerned about safety. But I would say in the last 4 to 6 weeks, we've seen a nice increase in delivery orders. We've seen more consumers coming back. Of course, there's some hesitance from some people and the market has been changed, but we're starting to see that recovery quite easily.
Sorry, Your Highness, if you could go next.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. We are the Restaurant and Cafe Association in Saudi Arabia. We try to be the voice of the industry and to build a community that can work together and build a better industry in the Saudi market. We've seen the impact as any other country in the world, especially when they started the lockdown. The government announced the lockdown. The curfew had an impact on the industry, especially on the fine dining and the casual dining. Quick service were able to to maintain some of their business through the delivery, which picked up. It was about double fold the usual traffic. Today we're back to business. Customer behavior is has changed actually, and we're still monitoring that impact. And however, they're a little bit coming back. Still, the fine dining and casual still impacted. What's concerning right now is the rise of infections coming back in Saudi. So we want to see how the government will react to that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Steve, could you go next, please?
Sure. Thank you, Davina. Our business is a importer and distributor of our food products into the HORECA sector in primarily in UAE, but also across Oman and Qatar. And I think probably in common with most of the rest of the, I guess, developed food service markets globally, what we've seen in our sector is a pretty significant decline, particularly through May. So we were down at sort of 20, 25% typically expected to see. And as His Highness mentioned, hotels being closed, fine dining almost at a standstill, along with caterers at a standstill. Only really QSR, some casuals who were operating takeaway and delivery models were driving some volume. So I guess the key challenges initially were for us as a distributor were inventory, aging inventory, so the product we were set upon, and liquidity in the marketplace. So obviously, as customers stopped coming through the door, payment cycles that were typically 30 to 60 days were moving out as far as often 180 days. So there's some pretty challenging stuff, and I guess it's led to quite a lot of review and introspection. I'm sure we'll cover some of that as we go through.
Great, thank you. Duncan, can you go next?
Yeah, hi. We are a obviously concept development and execution agency for food and beverage, basically across the Middle East and now into Australasia as well. And I think there's one word that sums up probably the majority of the last 4 to 5 months, and that is it's been brutal. There's no other word really to describe it. What's interesting to see now is how different these two sectors of the world are moving forward. The UAE and Dubai is moving into its regrowth and relaunch phase, and I think that's fantastic and absolutely wonderful. And I'm sitting here in Melbourne right now. It's just gone 9:10, and we're into week 1 of another 5-week lockdown because cases have spread across the greater Melbourne city. So it is so diverse and divergent as to the way F&B is being impacted across the board. And obviously, I'm just going to use Australia as an example. You've got these restaurants that have mobilized 3-4 weeks ago and invested in their staff and invested in their new food and invested in their businesses, to all of a sudden be told to shut down again for another 6 weeks. It's crippling to the economy. And I think that is one thing that globally we're going to have to look at potentially as other spikes, waves, call them what you will, occur in the marketplace. But ultimately, this is something that is going to evolutionize the food and beverage industry going forward. There is no going back to the way things were, and the new normal is the normal. Let's forget about the past. It's all going to be about setting ourselves up for the future and how to deal with this going forward.
Thank you, Duncan. Peter, it's your turn. Peter, you're still on mute.
Thank you, Davina. So Sweetheart Kitchen started in the Middle East only 11 months ago. So there's a lot of noise in our data in terms of answering this question. because we were growing anyway. But as a delivery-only company, I suppose you might say we were well positioned for the pandemic. We didn't see any decline in our volume. Certainly, we might have seen a bit of an increase at the beginning, and now more of an increase as Corona starts to subside, I suppose, in Dubai. But it didn't impact us terribly adversely like dine-in. Certainly, we responded as an organization and shifted a bit from scaling and expansion towards a move towards unit economics and profitability. So, sorry, I'm in Berlin. But that brings me to my next point, which is I am in Europe now, and they are hopefully through the worst of it. And I am personally experiencing consumer habits, particularly when it comes to dining, completely back to normal. They have almost no cases here. So it is interesting to see. I agree with Duncan. Many of us are responding, and we will continue to go in the direction of innovation and planning for future shutdowns and this to go on for another year or two perhaps, and it will change things forever. But in the optimistic note, I am seeing, at least in Europe, behaviors going back to normal very quickly in terms of dining.
Great, thank you. So it sounds like, there are some, shoots of optimism or a way forward in terms of thinking about innovation. Just to quickly share the poll results. So we asked how quickly our viewers are expecting things to get back to pre-COVID levels of business in our first poll question of the day. The majority say 6 to 12 months. That's 46% of our respondents. Only, 24% said they think they're not going to see a full recovery over the next couple of years, but overwhelmingly so, people think within 3 to 6 months, but the majority think 6 to 12 months is where we're going to see business get back a little bit to normal. I was just wondering if anyone had any comments on that in terms of, do you share the sense of optimism that the next 6 to 12 months will see, a return to pre-COVID levels? And feel free to jump in on this. I'm going to start calling you.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll save you from doing that, Davina. It's fine. Look, I think there needs to be some confidence. I also think there needs to be global awareness as well. It's not, and we see far too many images of this going on globally now, where people are literally treating it like the way things were in the past. And it's not. It won't be going forward. I think we have the greatest opportunity to resume business and trade. I think one of the key points, and I would invite my other panelists to jump in. People are we're not going to see the same volume of consumers, but as a result of that, people are going to spend more when they go out. Dining out is going to become a trend that actually involves spending. You're going to spend more money to go and have the same experience you had 12 months ago in order to go and have that dine out experience, knowing that you're dining out in a safe and secure environment. So I'm optimistic to the point, and looking at that poll result, 6 to 12 months. Let's say we're almost 6 months into this now. So another 12 months from now takes us to the middle of next year. We should be in a better position by then, but I would welcome anyone else to throw in a comment.
This is Peter here. Thanks, Duncan. I certainly think what we'll see is during any sort of chaos, we'll see survival of the fittest, and whether consumption restores to 100% of where it was prior or 90%, we'll see a lot of smaller operators and less sophisticated operators not survive. And those that make it through, whether it's through persistence or they have cash reserves, whatever the case may be, or innovation, they will go back to normal and then some. They'll come back stronger, because I think we will see a greater decline in supply of F&B operators than we will see in a decline in consumption. So for those who make it through, there will be greater market share for them to capture. Simply because there will be less competition in a year than there was 6 months ago.
Yeah, Your Highness?
Yeah, Davina, if you allow me.
Not so good for the weak.
Yes.
I would say the government of Saudi they changed position when the pandemic started. At the beginning, they were so conservative, aggressive on taking action to fight this pandemic. But today, and they were putting health ahead of anything else. Today, they came to a realization that they have to balance both health and economy. So I don't believe we will go back to what was before in the last couple of 3-4 months. And I second what Dominic said is that we've seen in Saudi that the average check today, the frequency is less, but the average check is higher than before.
Got it. Steve, did you have something to add from the kind of supplier side? Do you think business will go back? And then Ikta, I'm going to come to you right after that.
I mean, look, I'd reiterate, I think, what Peter, certainly Peter and Duncan have said, in so much as whatever we're heading toward is going to be significantly different from that which we knew prior to COVID. And one of the side effects, which I believe to be healthy, is that the oversupply which has existed in certain markets is going to be impacted. So there will be those who are less fit, less in touch with what the consumer is looking for in the future, I think will wither on the vine. And that will, for those who survive, will be a healthy thing, because to both Duncan and Peter's point, that will mean that there will be greater share for those who demonstrate themselves as being best fit for whatever the future looks like.
Yeah.
From a supplier standpoint, look, we would rather have deeper relationships with a smaller number, because it enables you to build more meaningful kind of collaboration. So I think from a positive perspective, in amongst all what can appear to be a fairly bleak picture at the moment, I think there are some real chinks of light that will support the industry kind of growth going forward.
Great, thank you. Ikta?
Yeah, I think we're going to probably see 2 levels of recovery. So probably the immediate recovery is people who are not sort of the health and safety issues are alleviated. People are more comfortable to go out or picking, restaurants and partners who they trust more. But I think the second recovery is the question is, are people going to spend as much as they want? And there's going to be a real concern about value for the customer. I think people will maybe go out less frequently, like Duncan say, but really maybe go for higher end experience or special experiences because they want to go out. I think in the delivery segment, people are looking for a lot more value. Plus you've seen like purchasing behavior change, people working from home. So the lunchtime check is dropping, or you're going to see more people hosting events at home. So I think we'll have to look at recovery. What does recovery mean on a really micro level, with some players probably disappearing and some players rising up.
Thanks. And I think to a point, I think Duncan, was it you around volume of diners that are going out, and Ikta, like you mentioned, it's a level of how often people trust that they can go out and feel safe doing so. Right now, as we all know, the restaurants or cafes that are allowed to open, there's a range of, I guess, capacity percentages that they're allowed to operate in, 20%, 30%, 50%, and so on. So I think from the point of view of the operators and the restaurants, how does that reduced capacity affect business? Is there a way to still hit revenue targets, for example, when the capacity has been lowered? Duncan, if we can start with you and then jump to Your Highness.
Quite frankly, no, 20% capacity is very well. On all the modeling that we've done, it's almost impossible to be at a break-even perspective at 20% capacity. I think most restaurants that we've spoken to, most of the ones that we're dealing with at the moment, they're not. If the governments are not ready yet to release more capacity. 70% is kind of the break line border between 50 and 70% in order to see some form of positive cash flow, positive cash return. But once again, it's more expensive to mobilize and get yourself started for anything less than that. So I think, once again, this comes to the point of being very dynamic and very flexible going into the future, because in governments, and we were speaking about this the other day, you know, the UK and Australia implemented these job-saving, job-keeper initiatives where the governments invested money in ensuring that members of staff of these restaurants that had to shut down had up to 80% of their salaries covered by the government. Now that has helped a lot of businesses get through this period of time. And when they were able to open at 20%, they could bring a couple of people back in line to be able to get things moving. So I think, you know, different countries have approached this differently, but going forward, that sort of level of flexibility, the ability to be dynamic and respond when all of a sudden we need to, that is going to be something that becomes part of the mantra and the house policies of every individual F&B outlet going forward. Your Highness, for you.
Thank you. Actually, in the Restaurant Association, we worked hard to convince the government not to impose capacity limitations. And we were lucky that we were able to do that, because we were watching other markets and how it was difficult to operate in that, you know, within a limited capacity. So luckily we avoided this.
Thank you. On that note, I'd also like to open the second poll question for our audience, which relates to dining habits. So that's going to pop up on everyone's screens now. So if the audience can just vote while we continue the conversation, that would be amazing. So around the issue of, you know, levels of recovery, going out again is also the kind of, I guess, investments that operators and even suppliers for that matter need to make, including, you know, cloud kitchens as well, around sanitization, you know, whether it's remodeling, you know, the actual dining area and so on. So I'd like to pose a question about what kind of investments that we do need to make in order to flourish, and how is that going to be possible, you know, in the current era where it has been a challenge for the last few months. Ekta, could we start with you, please?
Sure. I think probably as soon as it started, everyone looked at their certifications and made sure they were all up to date. So HACCP, ISO, everything became like, if you weren't doing it, definitely became a point to double down. Also looking at how can you invest in a more structured way and using technology to enable you. Of course, if you have capacity limitations, you can't have that many staff on board. We, for example, invested even more in technology, trying to see, like, can we use thermal scanners to track fevers, or can we use automated cameras to see if there's a violation of not using a mask or a glove. But this is really a core part of our business, right? Like, you have to serve in these standards, in these, no matter what you're doing. So it just became more to the forefront, and I think it's something we're going to keep having to invest in.
Great, thank you. Duncan, do you want to go next?
Sure. On that point, I think one of the things that's crucial is how visible do we make our sanitization and our disinfection programs visible to the consumers? How do we convey the message that we have taken all of these necessary steps without actually having it in their face, so to speak? I mean, I will speak to everyone here and go, there's nothing worse than walking into a restaurant and having someone poke a thermometer at your forehead before you sit down at a table. So, you know, the investment, I think, going forward is going to be in ways to track, monitor, trace, test, etc., but without it invading into the dining experience. And I was talking to a gentleman the other day, you know, where they're using UV lighting above tables now, so that there's a little disc on a table in a restaurant that highlights blue if the table has been properly disinfected for COVID-19. So when a guest sits down, they see that disc illuminated, they know that the table's been disinfected because of the UV lighting above. There are all of these different areas, and I'm going to, Davina, sorry, I'm going to ask Steve to jump in on this, because I think that technology is actually where the investment is going to be. I think as operators, speaking on behalf of everyone on this panel, we have all practiced exceptionally good sanitization processes and systems before COVID-19 hit. But now it's about how do we ensure that the public is aware of what we used to do in the background so that they have a degree of comfort moving forward without it being completely intrusive. And Steve, do you have anything to say on that?
Sure. And I subscribe to your perspective that the last thing that, as a consumer myself, the last thing that you really want is for your experience to somehow be sort of de-enhanced, if that's the right word, just by having to kind of sit through a series of kind of processes or protocols that don't enhance your experience. I think that one of the things that we've seen, particularly in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm pretty sure that this will become standard demo, is increased attention from the regulators, particularly here in the UAE. So municipality really looking at existing processes, sanitization protocols, traceability kind of records. So things that, as you've said, were all in place, but are almost being enhanced and focused upon even more rigorously. So I foresee that being important. And in a conversation with Peter a couple of days ago, he also said, look, this is not something that you want to almost throw in the kind of face of the customer, but it needs to be there to support all the effort that is going on behind the scenes.
If you allow me, Vina, one of the initiatives that the local government actually is trying to introduce to bring back the trust of the customers is to install a public camera inside the kitchen of the restaurant to give them access to see the cleanliness and so on of the restaurants. But you see, Duncan, the challenge is how much are we willing to invest in technology where we, on the back of our heads, we still believe this is a short-term, thing. So should we go and invest that much money in the technology, then, a vaccine will come out and then that will be wasted? Or should we, that will become a normal standard and we should go for it in all cases? So I think that will be a limitation.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. I'd also like to bring in the cloud kitchens, as it were, the virtual kitchen operators into this, to just ask them about their opinion as well on, about these investments and how much is it necessary for the consumer to know exactly what's happening in the kitchen. Peter, let's start with you first.
Well, again, as a virtual kitchen operator, we already had the two advantages. One, we have fewer employees, so there's a lot of space between our employees to begin with. They're not on top of one another. They're very specialized at their tasks, so there's less risk for contamination there. And because we're closer to a manufacturing facility than a kitchen per se, I think our standards are, we're always more rigorous than a typical kitchen environment. And having done business on 3 different continents, I can say even pre-corona, the requirements of the Middle East jurisdictions are far stricter than the United States or Europe, far stricter. They don't necessarily mitigate the risk of corona, but I was always very impressed with how strict the hygiene rules and standards were in the region. All the technology, the cameras inside the kitchens, I don't know that consumers want to see what goes on behind the scenes in kitchens to begin with. But so I do think Duncan is correct that how far can you take it without ruining the experience that you seek to have beyond just the food? Certainly as a virtual kitchen, we are able to have our employees, you would think they were in hazmat suits, they're completely covered, and you don't run the risk of turning the customer off to the experience. However, you are safeguarding the consumer simultaneously. So we have the opportunity to behave in a way that is very protective to the consumer without destroying their experience. And certainly that's an advantage for us right now. And if I were in dining or dine-in, it would be something that certainly as a consumer, I don't want that in my face. I want to enjoy my experience and not the constant reminder of what we're in the middle of. So I don't have the answer for that other outside of how we're dealing with it.
Thanks, Peter. Ekta?
Yeah, I mean, our business is, as a cloud kitchen platform, we operate on behalf of brands. So we have, each brand can kind of approach it their own way, deciding should they explain it, should they take it face on, or do they want to just take a quieter approach? So we helped our brands do some research, and what we heard from the consumers was it wasn't just about the kitchen part, like how you cook or prepare the food, the safety in there, but the touch points to get to them. So consumers were very, like their biggest concern was the drivers, collecting items from the drivers, how it was being handled in transit, where they're wearing gloves, things like that. So we spend a lot of time like working with our partners, mainly the 3PL partners and the aggregators, trying to identify any drivers who needed more training, or for example, supplying gloves and sanitization on the spot. And we found that that was basically the best way to earn their trust, the consumers, because ultimately, maybe if you have that kind of situation happen now, once or twice, you're going to lose that customer forever. Whereas before, they were a bit more mindful. So I think we all have to do a bit of education. And I think a lot of the dine-in restaurants have done it as well. Like this, we're doing this for you. We don't want to be intrusive, but we're doing this for you. And this kind of language and the communication with the consumer will keep, I think, changing and evolving in the next few months.
Thank you. I'm quickly going to share the poll results with everyone before I actually ask for the next poll to go up. So the question we asked was how the current situation has impacted dining habits from our point of view of our viewers. So 41% said that, it has been impacted and they don't go out as much as they used to. And a close 38% said they now prefer cooking their own meals. And then takeout and delivery came in third at 16%, and the rest said that they go out as much as they used to, which is barely anything. So overall, a lot of people either not going out as much or cooking their own meals. I mean, I personally would have thought maybe takeout and delivery would have been a little higher, but clearly that's not the case. So I just want to get any, input from our panelists on kind of this trend that they're seeing, but also if I can get the next poll question up, only because that relates to what we were just talking about, around whether do consumers want to know what exactly companies are doing, for safety and hygiene. But yeah, can I get your feedback on the dining habits of our viewers? Duncan, I can see you're already ready.
Well, I just, because I found that fascinating, more so based on what Ekta was just talking about as well, but because my initial impression when all of this started was delivery was going to go through the roof. I mean, and I will be the first one to say I was on the bandwagon of going, third-party aggregators, I'm not very happy with you right now because you're taking all my business and my revenue. However, what's been interesting is the exploration of the fact that people actually didn't jump on the delivery bandwagon, and that poll kind of backs that up to a certain degree. That the numbers stayed pretty stagnant. There was a little bit of growth, but not a lot. And yet people turned back to cooking at home. They turned back to going to the grocery, to the grocery store and to the supermarket and to buying their own fresh produce. I think that has not been a bad thing for civilization as a whole. I think getting people back into the kitchen and actually cooking occasionally, every now and then in their homes, without relying 100% on dining out and delivery. Yes, it's my industry, it's my business, but I think it also gives people a great appreciation when they do go out of the experience that they're having. And because let's be frank, not everyone's a good cook. And I'll raise my hand and say, I'm not one myself. Tested that many times. So it gives you so much more appreciation when you do go out or when you do order that meal on delivery. And once again, I think it's almost a rebirth of our industry from that perspective. People have hit the reset button, and now is the time for us to move forward. And I think that poll, very interesting results indeed.
Did anyone else have any feedback on that? Or Peter, yeah, I can see your, and Ekta as well. So Peter, you go first, and then Ekta will jump to you.
I don't think it was Corona or hygiene per se that has not caused such an influx of delivery, but rather people have less time commuting or they're unemployed. So they have more time on their hands. Delivery, I've always thought, was growing so exponentially all these years because it was a convenience, another task in our daily lives that we could outsource. And now that we have a little more free time on our hands, I think intuitively we're human beings. We go back to the basics in some ways. So in that regard, I think certainly online grocery shopping has had a success story here. People are not concerned with having their groceries delivered to them. So I do think this has been more a function of people having more time on their hands than being concerned about the hygienic conditions or the delivery workers per se.
Okay, Ekta?
Yeah, I mean, it's a watershed moment for online groceries. So I think if you are in that market or if you enter that market, you're probably seeing some really great feedback. We actually entered that market. We created a grocery vertical, just offering kitchen items that we use in our kitchens to consumer, and was basically driven by consumers saying, you know what, I don't want to talk to a driver every day. I don't want to meet him every day. I want to basically stock up. We also saw some trends like, you know, people trying to buy fresh produce for the people who can cook, but a lot of people who just needed help. So the category that we saw quite a bit of growth in are like ready to eat, frozen items, like items from your brands. And I think we've seen it a lot with even the fine dining restaurants. Like a lot of them are doing deliveries for the first time. They're doing these really interesting meal kits at home, like bring that experience home. And how can you add to that? So I think it's like interesting to see also the innovation that people are doing across different price points. Because yes, you'll have the consumer who is happy to go out to a really nice restaurant and have a meal once a week, but you're also going to have the consumer who's going to treat takeout as their, you know, little win for the week. So we have to look at how do we basically attract and have an offering for each of these price points.
Thank you. Your Highness, have you seen a similar trend in Saudi Arabia as well?
Yeah, actually the same, but I think we should be as an industry, more aggressive on bringing back the trust of the customer. We've seen, for example, in China, on the delivery, you can track the temperature of the driver all the way from the restaurant to your home. So we need to be, you know, out there and trying to fight back to gain this trust of the customer. And many fronts.
Thank you. I have a quick question based on something that was just said during the discussion. I think, Duncan, you said, like, you know, diners are now appreciating going out a little bit more. And I guess my question to everyone, and from the supplier side also, you know, whether it's affecting, you know, the kind of requirements you're seeing from your customers, Steve, but what does this mean for the future of, say, fine dining and so on? Are there certain concepts that will be now more popular because of, you know, going out is not a novelty, but, you know, it's almost a treat nowadays rather than maybe something that's an everyday thing. So what do you think is the future in terms of popularity? Are we going to see fine dining become more popular again? You know, the more, you know, white tablecloth thing, or is it still the whole casual vibe that's going on? And also, yeah, how that's affecting you from a supplier side as well. Duncan, you're going first.
Well, I've got a very interesting story. Local, a very good friend of mine has a restaurant in Canberra, which is in the Australian Capital Territory. And just pre-COVID, he was selling his 5-course set menu. Once again, very lovely, casual, engaging environment for $55 US a head for 5 courses, which for me, I thought was very reasonable, exceptionally good pricing. Canberra and the ACT has now moved out of all restrictions. All the restaurants are back open to where they would be. And he's now selling the same 5-course menu for $80 per person and is sold out 2.5 weeks in advance. So what I think we're going to see is maybe we're going to push that fine dining level further up the chart. and what used to be seen as a polished or high-end casual experience is going to move into the vacuum that was created by former fine dining, because there is more investment. And to His Highness's greatest respect, tracking the drivers on a motorcycle is a huge investment in technology, which I don't know if I could do that myself. But I think all of these things add to the cost of putting that final beautiful dish on a plate and serving it to the consumer. And I think we're going to see that the polished and the premium casual dining experience is going to move forward as people go in to experience what they did again, but in an environment that is obviously safe, secure, clean, and one that brings them joy and happiness.
Steve, yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Look, I think for us, it's watch this space. So as the market here begins to reopen, definitely what we are seeing is big groups of consumers start to re-engage with those at the kind of at the higher end of kind of premium dining, as well as kind of casual outlets, and I think that may be a function of everybody's been, in lockdown for quite a long time and are just desperate to get out, because I mean, fundamentally we are very kind of social beings as humans. But I think for all the reasons that we've covered previously on this discussion, I think the smart operators will win the confidence of those consumers through, I guess, improved safety measures, using tech to demonstrate that they can operate at the very kind of highest levels and not put people or consumers at risk. So I don't think the kind of premium end, the kind of dining out is under. It's changing. The shape of it will change, but I genuinely don't believe it's under great threat.
Thank you. Sorry, Your Highness, were you going to say something earlier?
Yeah, actually, the watching the Saudi market, our main concern is in the fine dining, especially that the segment that is coming back to normal, the old normal, are the young adults, which are not the customer for the fine dining. But the customers for the fine dining still, they're not, taking that step back to the restaurant industry. So.
All right, thank you for that. So I've got quite a few audience questions coming in. So what I'm going to do is start asking those, also because we just have 17 minutes left. And so once I ask the question, whoever feels that they want to answer, just unmute yourself and get straight into it. So this one is a little related to something that we started the discussion with, but it's a little more specific. So how is the industry going to manage 30 to 50% occupancy levels vis-a-vis profitability, considering fixed costs such as rents and salaries? I will start pointing, shouting out names. Yep, Peter.
Oh boy, I didn't mean to.
Well, you unmuted yourself. You did it. You did it to yourself.
My natural tendency. So I've been in non-virtual kitchens, so I know I can think about how I would deal with things. And Duncan's right. The models definitely will tell you that below a certain amount of occupancy, you can't reach break even. You don't reopen. That's the answer. You don't reopen, and you minimize your cash burn over what you pray to be the shortest period of time possible until you feel that things come back to where capacity levels allow you to achieve profitability. And if you model out how much cash you have and how much longer you think you need to stay closed, it is something that we have done in Kuwait, even with virtual. We cannot open in Kuwait. There is not enough fleet and logistics to support the volume required for us. We have 7 units built and all closed. It's less expensive to remain closed than to be opened and not building a business. So in some ways, yeah, that's kind of how we have handled it in our business.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to move to another question. This is from Jessica. So this relates to food handling practices. So do you, as the panelists, think that consumers are developing a heightened sense of what they view as safe when it comes to handling food? And is there, I mean, we already knew provenance was something that consumers cared about a lot more in the last couple of years, but do you think that there's now even more so an increasing desire to know where their food has come from, how it was grown? Is this, you know, just a normal trend, like an acceleration of what has already been there, or do you think this is heightened due to the coronavirus?
I think there was also a fair amount of misinformation, maybe floating around at the beginning of COVID. Like no one knew what was going on. One day it was like, yeah, you'll get it from, I don't know, from eating food. One day you'll get it from packaging. So I think we have to like let the dust settle and see if this continues. I think just from people returning to sort of normal, you can see that people are a little more confident. I think people are more discerning about who the brand is. If there's anything that we can see is that brand value lasts, right? The brands you trusted before COVID, you're probably returning to them because you have some sort of affinity, whether it's their safety practices or what they stand for, or ultimately what product they serve. So that's, I think, what's gonna, like, once the dust settles, that will basically be it.
Thank you. Right, let's see. Okay, so I have a question from Megha. She says, restaurants and bars and hotels in Dubai have been full over the weekend every time we've tried to book. Isn't this a surge in recovery already? Duncan, I'm going to point to you now.
I figured that was coming. Yes, it's definitely a surge in recovery. And I think it's a positive step. I'm cautioned as well to the effect that everyone has been locked away is such a terrible word to use, but it's how it's felt for a lot of us for many, many months. And cabin fever does set in, and I think initially everyone is just bursting at the seams to go out and do what they need to do. But the onus comes back onto the operator and onto the restaurateur to ensure that the levels and the standards are still there and delivered. It's not just a free-for-all, and the volume of business is not going to sustain. This is everyone going, let me out. And, you know, you still got to deliver high level of service, high level of food quality, high level of standards, an amazing experience. Because once the breath has been released, people are back at choice again. So I think, you know, to the point of the question, it is definitely a step in the road to recovery, but we shouldn't all be taking a deep breath and going, we're done, that's it, let's rest, put our feet up and let the profits run in, because we're certainly not in that place just yet.
Thank you. So I have another question here from Mehnur, and I think the question is, what are the new strategies that the hospitality industry, the food and hospitality industry, is trying to put into place to essentially recover from the losses caused to the industry during the lockdowns, specifically with sales strategies and I guess sales and marketing to basically get consumers back. Essentially, are your strategies changing in how you operate?
Let's hope that when Corona ends and the jurisdictions allow things to open, you shouldn't have to incur marketing or sales strategy costs to bring the consumer back in. That would be my quick and dirty answer on that one. I really think that the consumer's staying away because of COVID, and when those restrictions lift, they're back in full force.
Does anyone else have any input on that one? Yeah, Ekta?
Yeah, I just want, I think like during COVID, we saw a bit of this. A lot of brands, a lot of restaurants, just to keep the lights on, were indulging in quite a bit of heavy discounting. So we have to hope that that hasn't ruined the customer. We often counsel brands that, like, you know, if you're going to run a promotion, run it with the idea of a longevity, make sure you're profitable and you can bring these customers back. So we're really trying to avoid like if everyone partakes in these excessive marketing and promotions, it's really a race to the bottom for everyone. So I think just collectively, we have to be a bit smarter and focus again on product and experience versus just let's, hit this month's numbers. So that's key.
Thank you. Your Highness?
I just want to, hit light on what we're doing in the association to help the micro and small businesses in Saudi. We launched a new portal where we provide all the best practices that we find globally on how to manage the business, from buying all the way to menu management. But this is for the micro and small. So if any of the audience here falls in that category, please visit the website and you'll find it. If you don't mind, if I can say the website domain, it's qoot-sa.org. Okay.
Thank you.
Davina,
yes, Duncan?
Davina, can I just jump in quickly on Ekta's point? I think that once again, COVID, for all of the things that it has done, the discounting mentality that was rife throughout the region has an opportunity now to be completely rethought. I think it's a great opportunity. People are not looking for the greatest deal that they can get. They're actually looking to go out and have a good time at the end of the day right now. And I think that this would be one of the worst opportunities to go into a discounting havoc or discounting mania. We've seen that. We've been down that path already across multiple regions. And now is the time to actually, to Ekta's point, be strategic about what you're going to do with your efforts and your marketing, your marketing decisions moving forward. Strategy needs to be long-term, not just making a short-term quick win.
Thank you. I think we might have time for another question, depending on how long it takes to answer this one. And it's just something I wanted to ask earlier as well, but this question has come from Mr. Badr. He's asking whether there's a vision in terms of digitalization in restaurants, contactless points of sales. And I've had another audience question ask whether delivery drones are something that you want to invest in. So, do consumers want that? Do they want to interact less and less with people? Just your thoughts on, digitalization and tech in restaurants moving forward. Yes, Peter.
I guess this is going to come to the virtual side anyway. So traditionally food, and now tech is entering food. Tech plays by different rules than the food industry. The investors have different expectations and they make more substantial investments in technology than in food traditionally. As tech enters the food space more and more, there will be different expectations and of how that investment is used, and much larger investments. So as you see whether drones work for delivery or not, it will be experimented with on a large scale. Robots as another example. So that is beneficial to the F&B existing players. If they want to raise funding, all they have to do is talk about the incorporation of tech, and they will get funding and they can begin to experiment and incorporate more technology. So to me, this turns into the acceleration of funding going into food. If the food industry openly embraces tech, in which case they can begin to participate in those higher valuations and the greater rounds of funding in a way that they never really could participate previously.
Okay. Any other comments on this topic around digitalization or?
There's going to be also a more emphasis on collaboration when it comes to technology. So food is a very collaborative industry, right? Supply chain, aggregators, 3PL partners. You can look at tech as a real innovation space, but there's also like basics which aren't being done in the industry, especially in the GCC. A lot of brands have massive call centers which are, processing orders, or for example, I still know POs are sometimes, processed manually. Payments were all being done on cash. So even on the supply chain, we've seen, like, you know, before everyone would want a written receipt, now people are accepting orders over emails. Like, we've seen a nice adoption of technology, like the basics. I think it'll be nice to see this accelerate, you know, back-to-back integration with your suppliers or with your aggregators. I think these types of basics will become standard across more and more players, and everyone will realize that they have to do that. It's an easy way to save cost as well as to just have a better offering.
Duncan, I see you've unmuted yourself, so.
Yeah, Davina, if I can just finish off, I think that this, for the consumer, is going to be come more into play as we move forward. I mean, we've already been seeing during this process, you know, QR codes to get menus downloaded, doing all of your ordering visually on your own interface without having to touch anything else. But F&B and the restaurant industry is a human contact industry. It is a human touch point. We're never going to see that human element completely removed. However, and one of the examples that I can use right now, one of the restaurants that we're working on right now, is about bringing everything that's back of house, point of sale, payroll, rostering, attendance figures, accounting, and having it all on here, so that owners and operators are less tied into the back day-to-day administrative side and are now more forward and more present in the business. And I think that is where technology is going to play a huge part going forward.
Okay, thank you. So we're nearly out of time. So what I'm going to do is just go through our panel for quick closing comments. And because we've been talking a lot about innovation and ways to move forward, what I'd like you to focus on in your very brief closing comment is, you know, what is perhaps the one opportunity that you can see coming out of the situation as we move ahead? Ekta?
Sure. I think, like, the key thing is this was a major reset, right? It's back to basics. So I think it's a good, maybe harsh reminder that you need to focus on the basics. Do you have unit economics? Are you profitable in a normal sense? Because in this type of situation, and we don't know if there's a second wave or whatever next comes up, the better, you know, you're able to defend yourself, the better state your business in, the more likely you're going to survive. And that just comes down to basics. Know your customer, offer a good service, and ultimately, you know, check where your money is going. So I think that's a critical learning.
Thank you. Your Highness?
Actually, it's a difficult question to answer, to be honest. But I'll try to shed another light on what's happening in Saudi. As you know, the government have been cutting, you know, government spending in many projects, except the tourism budget. So the government is going full force with implementing the tourism budget. Spending and opening the market, and only recently the restaurant industry have been classified as part of the tourism. Usually before that wasn't in Saudi. So now the Ministry of Tourism is looking after the sector. And we are very optimistic actually to see that the ministry will drive and organize the industry much better than when it used to be looked after by the Ministry of Municipality. So.
Thank you. Steve?
I think the things that, from a supply chain perspective, the things that COVID have forced us to focus upon have been, again, coming back to the basics of knowing your customer and what they really want moving forward, ensuring that we have complete supply chain security. And there's been an awful lot talked. We've not touched upon it much today, but in country here in the UAE about local production, and so, you know, how we as a distributor support the distribution and reach of locally produced products to support the proposition and the quality of eating out or restaurant operations forthwith.
Thank you. And yeah, that is an interesting topic, but that's a whole other discussion. So if I can move on to Peter.
So I've been listening and just thinking about my response, and mine is more, much broader. COVID is a unique type of adversity that we're facing because it's just so global. But any business owner, certainly in F&B, has definitely at some stage of their career been through, at a micro level, whether it's their own business or their market, been through something as similar to this. So my view and my advice to anyone, whether they're an owner, a vendor, an employee, is, that it's times like this where it's your mental mindset and how your mind responds to these types of challenges. Do you become a victim of circumstance? Everyone on this call, participants, everyone could be that. Or you can say, I'm going to figure out a way around this or through it or under it. And that could mean working twice as many hours as you used to, or contacting people who you might have been intimidated to contact in the past because they're a CEO or they work for a municipality. Whatever the case may be, now is when you're able to break the rules and set your inhibitions aside, because really only the strong survive right now, and you will see the strong will survive. So it really is certainly unprecedented, but you have to attack just like you would attack if you were an owner of a startup that was struggling in its first few months. This is no different. And that's really my advice to anybody. This is no different than any other sort of obstacle that you'll encounter in your life.
Thank you. And Duncan, very brief closing remarks.
Very brief, I know, because we're out of time. I'm going to touch on what Hector and Peter said. I think to the point that this is a time for everyone to review your balance sheet and review your P&L. We may have been living the largesse for many years. Now is the time to go, how do we create an efficient, effective, operational business model moving forward that has the ability to sustain ourselves through this? And secondly, as hard as it sounds and as hard as it is to say, this is also a time for opportunity. To Peter's point, there are opportunities out there for those that have got the gumption to go forth and say, now is when I'm going to make my move. And maybe I'm a chef who's been sitting as a head chef in a restaurant, and there's a restaurant that's closed next door to me, and I've got an opportunity to jump in there and do my own thing. This is the opportunity to do that as well. So I think it's a balance of both. I think it's going to be a fresh new world, and I'm honestly looking forward to being part of it.
Thank you very much. I just want to say thank you to all our panelists today. Some great insights, sparing your time and your thoughts and answering as many questions as we could. Really sorry if we couldn't get to your question. There were just so many. But for now, I'm going to hand over to Mark again, who will say the closing remarks before we end this webinar.
Thank you, Davina, and thank you to our panel. Look, one of the things that struck me in listening to the conversation today is that food is not just fuel. We're social beings, and as fantastic as these webinars and virtual meeting spaces have been, there's nothing like the shared pleasure from going out to a restaurant and enjoying some social time with friends and family. And I was one of those people who, at the start of, what do they call it, the lockdown, I started baking sourdough bread and cooking and experimenting with new recipes. But the sheer joy of being able to go out to enjoy a great meal. And as you say, the check size has gone up because it was such a pleasure. I did have a starter and a dessert. So typically it would be one or the other. So look, I hope we can all get together, right, in the real on the 3rd to 5th of November. It would be wonderful to run this panel again at our Gulf Host exhibition at the beginning of November, and we'll ask our producers to look at setting that up where we can all get together. And that bit of being back together and meeting and connecting and exploring new ideas is, I think, really, really important. And sometimes you have to physically connect to do that. So for anybody that's watching, please take a look at our show website, gulfhost.ae, and do look at the travel arrangements that are being made for you to join us here in Dubai, 3rd to 5th of November. Thank you once again, panel. Really enjoyed today. Thank you, Davina.